Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Modern Customer Podcast. I'm your host, Blake Morgan. Today, I am chatting with Bill Bruno. He is the CEO of Celebrus. He has decades of experience, and prior to his work at Celebrus, he was the CEO of an AIM-listed company that successfully acquired his consulting business. If you are interested in data and customer experience, this episode is for you. We are talking about identity in customer experience and the snowball effect of data. Please enjoy Bill Bruno. This podcast is sponsored by Celebrus. Celebrus is the radical data solution that solves data, identity, and connectivity gaps in live time to reveal true consumer context and deliver revolutionary insight to your teams. Celebrus provides the instant context, identity resolution, and activation you need to unleash the power of your data and deliver next-level marketing and customer experiences. For more information on Celebrus, just visit their website at www.celebrus.com. That's www.celebrus.com. Bill, welcome to the Modern Customer Podcast. I am so inspired by all the figurines behind you. Let's just kick off with that. What's the story behind all these figurines?
Well, first, thanks for having me. And yeah, it's a common question whenever I turn on my video, but I am in my office just outside of Chicago, and I collect action figures from around the world. So what you're seeing behind me are wrestling action figures, stuff from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, kind of from all over the place, and a bunch of current ones as well. And my wife's happy with it as long as it stays in this room.
Right. That's awesome. Well, you never know what these investments will bring later. Like some things you would be so surprised how valuable they become, like baseball
I,
cards, and
Yeah,
it's a whole
that
thing.
really escalated in the pandemic as well. Like values of things, I think everybody got really nostalgic, and so the values of some of these things have gone through the roof. I have had people ask, and a lot of this behind me is actually insured.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Good for you. So today on the show, we're talking about all things data. We're talking about customer experience.
Mhm.
And just off the heels, I was just at a data conference last week in Vegas. There's still so much change happening all the time with cookies, with what companies can do. How can they take data and personalize the customer experience using that data? So you are in the thick of it. Tell our listeners what for you is most interesting about what's happening right now with technology when we think about data and how it can improve customer experience.
Sure. No, absolutely. It is interesting, isn't it? And you cross paths in the air with my team. They're in Vegas as we speak for a couple of conferences on the retail and finance side, all focused around customer experience. It's so awesome to be back in front of people and be out on the road again and,
Yes.
and at these shows learning together. But I think from a Celebrus perspective, when we're working with customers and we think about the customer experience, I think the first thing that always comes to mind for us is you need to try to help brands and consumers build a better relationship, right? At the end of the day, like you could look at it tactically and say, we're trying to improve this form, or we're trying to improve what types of campaigns we're investing in. But really, it's about the relationship between brands and consumers and the data that can be available, provided consumers are okay with it, and how brands can then use that data to drive a positive experience, whether that's in person, whether that's on a website, whether that's on a mobile app. And all of these changes, the cookie changes and everything you just mentioned, means that it's really never been harder to be in marketing and advertising than it is today. And it's constantly changing. But the one constant that kind of sits underneath all of it, at least in my opinion, is if you build a better first party data set and you do that in a way that's compliant so that consumers have the chance to either opt in or opt out, right? It's a great start, and it starts to put building blocks in place that's a bit more future proof than a lot of the old ways of doing things.
Right. So it sounds like it's never been harder, but the opportunity has never been greater. What are
Yeah.
some of the things that the companies are doing right that have a really wonderful data strategy? What are the things they're doing better than other companies?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that seems to be sort of common amongst organizations that I've seen doing it well, either companies that we're working directly with or that friends are at, is they're sort of realizing that they need to rethink what they're doing today. So if organizations are making that bold first step of being willing to look at what's being done today, what systems are in place, and questioning whether or not they're the right fit, then they're already light years ahead of a lot of organizations, right? That's sort of, it's kind of that, and you and I and everyone else, we get busy, you get too close to the forest to see the trees. And if you can't take that step back to strategically say, maybe this isn't the right fit, then I think you start to see organizations, if they make that step, start to realize like, hey, maybe we could be doing things better for our customers. But we've sort of, and this is a common thread I've seen a lot, is that organizations will generally reduce or settle on what their actual requirements are based upon the limitations of the technology that they have, instead of asking the question, can we actually do this better another way? And perhaps we can deliver what we want for consumers if we looked to do things differently. And you've got a bunch of brilliant marketing and business and advertising minds out there that have all of these great ideas, and they're all still achievable. It just needs to be done from a basis of owning and controlling the data instead of renting, borrowing, and selling the data all throughout the web.
Right, because as a consumer, Bill, I'm sure you've even had the experience where you get something in the mail, you get an email, and you think, how the heck did this company find me? Who sold my data to them? And for me, it's a rare day where I'll buy something from someone that has obviously bought my data. What's going on out there in the world? What are you seeing with just a common sense approach to, customers don't like it when we buy their data and start spamming them?
I've been in a lot of conversations. It's a really good point. I think I got 2 or 3 emails this morning that kind of made me scratch my head and go, I've never interacted with this brand before, right? It happens a lot. And those are the brands that are going to struggle, right? And because they're not building trust. I was on a podcast recently with Forrester, and they were talking all about consumer privacy and the expectations and almost personas that people have, right? And my persona when it comes to privacy is I'm more than happy, because I've been in the data world now for over 20 years, right? I'm happy to give you as a brand my information as long as you use it well. And not everybody is educated yet, and I think we're getting there in terms of what doing it well looks like, right? I think everybody could probably come up with a list, if we did a survey, of all the things that upset them that brands do, right? And you could probably pretty quickly, it'd be really interesting to get kind of a personal survey of consumers of like, these are the things I don't like, these are the things I like. But at the root of it, and I've said this for years, and I've said this in many other discussions, brands have this constant struggle of having to toe the line between being helpful and creepy. And it's a really easy line to cross over if you're not careful. And that's why you have to think about the different tools, the different campaigns, the different investments you can make, and who to target those towards. Because in the past, you would just blindly target them to everyone, right? You'd go out and you'd do third-party ads and bidding and buying programmatically for everyone. But not everyone has the same compliance preferences. Not everybody has the same comfort levels. And so it really does add a layer of complexity that requires some pretty good strategic thought.
So, Bill, a lot of what I understand that you do is just helping companies identify their customers to match data across different channels. Because as a customer, we've all had that experience of we call our bank, we've contacted the wrong department, and we have to repeat ourselves. So it can be in the best interest of the customer when the company actually has accurate data on us. How big is this problem on not being able to match data and follow the customer across channels?
One of the first projects I did when I started my career in like 2003 looks a lot like the challenge we're talking about now. A lot of these pain points have been in the industry for a very long time. There's just been different band-aids applied here and there in hopes that it would solve it, right? But at the crux of the issue is that digital as a channel, which nowadays, includes not just your websites, your tablets, your mobile devices, but your connected TVs, your Roku apps. I mean, if you think about it, there's so many ways and touch points now that a consumer digitally can interact with a brand. And when it was just websites or just websites and mobile apps, even then it was it was so difficult and almost impossible for organizations to make sense of digital data because generally speaking, it lacks structure. It lacks, a sort of logical structure to where you can say, this is Bill. Bill's done this over here. And we can tie it over to here and say, Bill's also been in the branch speaking with one of our finance reps in the last 3 months. To do that, you have to have a very strong solution for digital identity. You have to have a structured sort of data model for digital. And you have to be able to then connect and transform the digital data before it gets to where you want to use it, because otherwise you spend all day wrestling with it, right? And those three sort of core tenets is exactly what Celebrus does on a daily basis and what we're doing today for about 130 organizations in 27 different countries around the globe.
Yeah. And so when a customer comes to you, what are some of the big things that they really want help with?
Yeah, so there's usually 4 gaps these days that come up, and we try to boil them down pretty simplistically because one of the things I try to do and we all try to do at Celebrus is stop using buzzwords or big words for the sake of trying to sound smart, right? So
Oh, good. Thank God.
the first challenge is very simple: bad data, right? They're writing code and tagging. They're tired of it. There's gaps. They don't trust it. They're spending more time trying to clean it than they are use it, right? That's sort of problem number one. The second problem kind of relates to what you said right as we kicked off, which is around digital identity. Their cookies for the solutions they're using are being blocked. They don't know who their consumers are, and they just wish that they did, right? Even if you're anonymous, they want to know you've been there before and what you've done. The third challenge is around connectivity, and it kind of goes back to your point around the cross-channel and bringing it all together. But if you can't bring digital data to where you need it because your business users need it in a certain place, an application, a reporting solution, data science, whatever the case may be, right? There's somewhere they need it and it needs to be in a certain format. And then the final one, and this one is getting kind of worse and worse, is compliance and privacy challenges, right? They also want to know, because think about how, Blake, how quickly we traverse a mobile app or a website if it's a site that we're used to, right? As a brand, you don't have a lot of time to intervene or to try to help guide us, right? So you need to use the data extremely real time or live time, as we like to say. To do that, though, in the States, as an example, where you've got privacy challenges at a state level, you need to know that the data you have is actually usable legally. So you need a solution that you have trust in to intervene in those seconds that you have, on a website or a mobile app to catch Blake's attention or my attention, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And when I think about the apps that I use the most, I mean, even for you, Bill, think about the apps that you use the most. Some of the things that I notice even initially is just signing in, password, like the app not recognizing me and then trying to retrieve just like these basic things that so many companies, big companies, just still don't do well. And I think understanding what the customer is trying to do and maybe using data to help them to help problem solve. What is this why is this customer here? How can we add value to their lives? Is that something that a lot of your customers come to you with, that challenge of customer journey mapping?
Yeah, absolutely. I was with an airline last week, just as a prime example, right? And their use cases aren't difficult, some of the ones that they're looking to solve for, but with their existing tech, it was, right? They want to know simple things like, this person's been here 3 times in the last 30 days looking at a flight to San Francisco, right? Chances are they're maybe cost conscious. They're trying to make sure that they're getting the right price. What can the airline do in that moment if they knew that information to secure the ticket, right? To get the revenue coming in, to get the deal done, right? And those types of things rely so much on digital identity. And with all of the cookie blocking and Apple Intelligent Tracking Prevention and everything else, these third-party systems can't keep up and can't play in that world. And Celebrus as a true first-party solution with an identity graph and all kinds of other bells and whistles, right? We're not blocked, we're not restricted, and the customers own and control it. So it gives them a different view into the journeys we're having with their brand.
So you mentioned Apple Intelligent Tracking. What is that?
So that's really the third party cookie blocking, right? So Apple, I suppose you could say it was Apple's gut punch towards Facebook and other rivals, right? But in reality, it was across all Safari-based browsers, it's them blocking and restricting third-party cookies, which advertising was built upon, right? The ads that follow you all over the web
Right.
as you traverse to different sites, and Apple basically eliminating that. Mozilla Firefox did the same thing. They called it total cookie protection. And all the browsers except for Google have done something, although Google has had a bunch of start stops. And naturally, given their advertising business, it's taking a little bit of time to come up with what that solution is going to be.
Yeah, because I use Chrome and I notice like all the clothes that I'm shopping for are just haunting me every single day, no matter where I go. But that's so interesting. All right, so Apple Intelligent Tracking. So I mean, that's basically just another term for the cookie issue.
Yeah. Yeah, it's basically just a fancy term for that. It's Apple's version. So basically across any Apple device and Safari, that's the type of restriction that they're putting in place.
So let's go back to the airline example you mentioned. The airlines are always an interesting use case for customer experience. I hate to say they're so often they're so late to the game. And even I fly a major airline, probably shouldn't mention who it is. I don't want to get them in trouble, but I noticed one of my many flights that I take was the schedule changed. And so when I went to change that flight, which I needed to do, a chatbot popped up. And I said, "Oh, look, this airline has a chatbot now." And it was the worst experience. It didn't even let me ask or finish asking the question. It just closed. It was just so strange. And I thought to myself, what are they thinking to just throw up a chatbot? Let's talk about the airline industry, if that's one that you know quite a bit about. Like, where would you say they are with regard to data personalization and digital customer experience?
I think travel and hospitality in general, and airlines obviously included in that, have relied a lot on email marketing, right? If you think about the trips you book and all the number of emails you get leading up to the trip or after the
Yes.
trip, and cross sell, upsell, right? I think the example you just gave is an interesting one because the airline probably doesn't even know that's happening, right? And they don't know it's happening because the tools they're using to sort of track the experience are prescriptive. You have to tell them what to look for, right? And you have to write, code and everything else to make it work. It's another differentiator of a platform like Celebrus, candidly, because we don't have any tagging or coding. We'd automatically pick that up, right? But they're probably not aware that that's happening. They probably didn't know it was you. So they don't know how loyal of a customer you are. And I think frankly, there's a lot that travel and hospitality can do just based on the conversations we're in right now, and have been with some of our existing customers. There is a gap. There's a lot that can be done. And the biggest limiter is it kind of goes, again, back to that digital integration we were talking about early on, because travel and hospitality have these massive loyalty databases. They have a ton of information about you.
Right.
But to connect what's happening in the moment in digital with those systems using a lot of traditional marketing technology is extremely difficult. So even though they have all of the data, the biggest limiter has been the tools they're using on their websites and mobile apps are too antiquated to sort of enable them to advance further and make use of that information.
Yeah. So let's say that they don't have big budgets for this. Do you have any advice for listeners out there in travel and hospitality that want to do the right thing, but they just simply don't have the money right now, the funding to keep up with these technology shifts?
Yeah, it's a good question, especially in the economy that we're in today, right? I think for me, it comes down to how solutions are priced. There's usually always a way to find something to work on a trial basis or for a specific use case that will add enough value to then generate the business case to potentially spend more. But I do think there's this sort of undercurrent of like, we need to add, we need to add, we need to add. And I do think that there's opportunity to subtract, right? There are most likely solutions today that people who are listening are using, and they know they're underperforming, and perhaps they continue to spend time on that. And that money that they're spending isn't just on licensing, right? It's the people costs, it's the time costs, it's the opportunity costs they're missing by not doing something different. So I think there's a lot of ways to build business cases. I won't pretend to be an expert in that, but I would imagine that they're spending money somewhere that probably could be adjusted and put towards a better cause that would generate them more revenue, that would then give them the momentum they need to build those programs appropriately.
Yeah, it seems like just knowing who is visiting you is so important, even from a customer service perspective, Bill. Like, how frustrating is it for a customer when you call a contact center? They don't know who you are, they don't know where you've been, they don't know what you're trying to do. This
Yep.
to me is just a no-brainer investment in making your customers' lives easier and better, and for your agents.
Yeah, it's you're kind of setting everybody up to deliver a bad experience if you don't connect it, right? I think that's the point. Even in your chat example, which is a great one, that chat bot could be informed better. These chat technologies have come a long way. You could call it AI, but really it's just logic, right? But you could put logic in that says, hey, we know it's Blake. We know
Mm-hmm.
Blake has this flight, and this flight just changed, right? That
Right.
information is not hard to come by. It just needs to be put together in the right way, so that way you have a good experience instead of the one that you had, right?
Let's just set the stage, and we're reaching the end of our interview together. But let's look at this from like marketing on one side and customer service on the other. So from my perspective as a customer, not as somebody that studies this stuff, but as a customer, it just feels that cookies and data are mostly being used to sell me to do advertising, to follow
Yep.
me and try and get her to buy, get her to click. And then on the customer service side, it just doesn't feel like the same amount of attention and excitement and enthusiasm is being used for data
hmm
to actually do something that would make me want to come back and spend more money. So it's like we're still in this old school thinking of date lists and just get her to click, and let's just spam the customer as much as possible because she's stupid. And actually doing the journey mapping and the design and the
Yep.
thoughtfulness that would come with something that would actually make me be, as a customer, more loyal. Any thoughts about that?
I honestly couldn't have said that any better,
Oh,
Blake. I
good.
think I think what
Time
you're
passed over. No,
I
I'm
think
kidding.
there you go. Done. Job done. We've just solved all the world's problems. And no, but I think what you're highlighting is a big problem that has existed for a long time. It's been written about for years in
Yes.
different ways, but it's that siloed mentality, right? And there's, when it comes to data, data should be thought of from an enterprise perspective. That's my personal opinion, right? You shouldn't have data for marketing, data for customer experience. There should be some sort of joined up effort because generally speaking, those should be intertwined, right? Customer experience and the customer service should want to make sure every time you interact with them that it's a positive experience. Marketing needs that to happen because otherwise their campaigns aren't going to work, even if they're the best campaigns in the world. If you're not actually delivering for your consumers, it doesn't matter, right? They'll go somewhere else. People don't have patience for poor brand experiences anymore.
Hmm.
And so what underpins all of that, in my personal opinion, is having better data where you can deliver it to each of the different silos of your business to sort of bring them together and rally them around a lot of common goals, because the silos don't work. They've never worked, and they're getting worse because digital is now so siloed.
Yeah. So, Bill, I am so glad you just asked that. What is the solution at the C level to this siloed data approach? What is the antithesis? What's a good C level leadership approach to an enterprise wide data strategy?
Wow. Well, that's a very good question. I think that first and foremost, I think it's culture and alignment. I think it's really easy to get down into the weeds to start talking about data and start talking about technology decisions, right? But I do think it's more of a culture and alignment discussion first and foremost, right? It's having a leadership team that is sort of carrying forward that teamwork mentality and that, hey, we're in this together mentality to try to start to knock down some of those walls and get some of these siloed teams working with each other, right? I know that's a bit more on the less science side, right? But the reality is if you get businesses talking to each other within an organization, you generally find some common ground and challenges that they're both trying to solve for. And then from there, it really comes down to not making decisions anymore in a silo when it pertains to technology, and even building a stronger partnership between the business and IT. And that's always been a problem, right? It's always been, well, IT doesn't move fast enough and doesn't understand. Business moves too fast and doesn't understand. The reality is, given that digital is tech now and is so reliant on having a better enterprise strategy, the organizations that I see that are doing the best for themselves and for their consumers are the ones that are bringing those teams together, listening and hearing both of those teams and making decisions based upon the requirements that everyone has across the business.
So, Bill, how much does the CEO need to know about data and data strategies?
I suppose, speaking as a CEO,
Right.
I think, in my opinion, if you're not making data-driven decisions and you're not aware of the data that's driving the business or the lack thereof, then you're probably not engaged enough in your role, right? That's not I'm not trying to upset anybody with those comments, right? But it's one of those things where if data is not part of every decision, then it's probably not a decision worth making.
Right. It's just like in our own lives. If it's out there, I mean, why not figure out how are we doing? How relevant are we being? How are we hitting our mark? Like, yeah, I mean, like you need
Well,
to know, you should want to know.
well, and I don't think you want to be in the news for the poor management of data, right? We've
Oh,
seen
yeah.
we've seen brands and organizations in the news for that. That's not what you want. And at the board level in organizations or management team levels, if you're not publicly traded, that if the topic of compliance and data management isn't making its way into those discussions, then you're probably putting yourself at risk of being in the news at some point.
Right, and nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. Well, I feel like we could talk forever, and this has been really interesting. And I feel like we need to have more conversations about data and leadership, because that's actually something I'm personally very focused on right now, too. But let's have a little fun and let's talk about you personally. Let's do the rapid fire round. Are you ready to take some quick rapid fire questions?
Always ready. Let's do it.
All right. Firstly, if you could have lunch with anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh man. Well, I live in Chicago, and grew up in Chicago, and I think it'd be really interesting to sit down with Michael Jordan and just pick his brain for a lunch.
Awesome. Let's talk about leadership resources. What's one resource book that you rely on for your own leadership development and strategy?
You know, there's usually in my personal life, I try to separate from business, right? So I rely on a lot of friends and networking and education. And there's one book though that I always tend to go back to that I think has some really good principles. And be honest, I don't read a ton of them, to be perfectly honest. But it's called The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Andreessen Horowitz. And that is a phenomenal book that, from a leader perspective, gives some really interesting perspectives on not just all the good stuff, right? Not everything's a good day when you're leading a business or an organization. And I think it gives a really interesting perspective on how to transform businesses and how to sort of deal with that.
Absolutely. What is your favorite type of vacation?
Just did one of those, and it was an all-inclusive, relaxing trip down to Mexico for a long weekend. I'm a big fan of. Well, my wife's kind of indoctrinated this into me, and I'm glad she did. But unplugging and getting away, so that your brain has time to rest. I don't think we do that enough. And so whether it's a trip to see a new country and new culture, or whether it's just an all-inclusive in Mexico where they're just bringing you some drinks and you don't ever have to leave the poolside. Those things are important, but I think it's just really important for people to know what they need to unplug mentally, because you're better, and you're more performant as a person if you recharge those batteries.
Yeah, well, that's a great segue to the next question. What is one strategy for managing hard days?
I think you've just got to have healthy outlets, because the days will always you will always have hard days. I think it's trying to find the silver lining, having a team around you that you can trust so that you're all in it together is really important. And having a hobby where you can just go get your mind off things. For me, it's golf when it's nice out, or woodworking, but it's, have something where it's completely different from your day job to just get your mind off things is when you're in the thick of it.
That's great. I love that. If you had to describe your outlook in one quick motto, what would it be?
I like to assume the worst and prepare for what we would do in all of those situations. So I suppose I'm a bit of a cynic in that regard, but I like to be prepared. I don't like surprises.
And do you have a leadership hack that helped get you to where you are?
Honestly, I don't think I can take credit for it. I was kind of fortunate early in my career to have an exec coach that I will always sort of be grateful for, because he was very good at helping me understand how to behave, how to act, how to make decisions, how to build cultures. And I'm never just like everybody else. You always forget and you make mistakes or you do something wrong. But that time I had was unbelievably helpful for my career.
And if our listeners and viewers want to learn more about Celebrus and the work that you guys do to help with data strategy, can they get in touch with you personally or your team? And how do they do
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. So you can find me, pretty much anywhere, LinkedIn and Twitter, everywhere else, at Bill Bruno. And you can find us, the website, celebrus.com. Feel free to reach out. I can put you in contact with anybody you'd like, or just have a chat. I'm always open to having chats and networking with folks.
Well, Bill, this has genuinely been a really fun conversation, and I just appreciate you being here on the Modern Customer to talk data shop.
Thanks for having me. Seriously, likewise, it's been a lot of fun, and I appreciate you taking the time as well to have this chat.
It's been my pleasure. All of you have been tuning in and watching the Modern Customer podcast. Until next time.